Hi, I'm Peter Cowan, the Bee Whisperer. I am in my Bangor yard, which has been doing very nicely this spring. We had 18 out of 19 make it through the winter here. And what we're looking at now is this is the time of year where I'm making the assessment. Do I reverse the brood chamber on my double story hives? Is that upper brood chamber sufficiently full of bees that they would benefit from having the lower brood chamber put on top to expand into? And remember the golden rule there is you need to have a very big cluster, pretty much fully occupying a whole deep super, and you need a decent weather forecast. And we have a decent weather forecast for that manipulation. That manipulation, I would like to see weather that's not going to get below freezing in the next few days particularly, and where the daytime temperatures are going to be in the 50s or more. And that's pretty much what we have at the moment. There's some rain in that forecast, but actually that's not a bad thing because rain means the bees stay in the hive, and that keeps the hive nice and warm as well. So there are some advantages to a rainy day in the springtime. So we're going to have a look at here. I've just taken a feeder off. They're working their way through the feeder. I've got bees right at the upper brood chamber, right down to the bottom entrance here. And if they're going right down to the bottom entrance, it means the cluster isn't just only occupying the top box. It means it's a very good sign that they may very well be occupying the bottom box also. So they have been expanding. Let's have a look inside. We've got a reasonable cluster here. Not wasting much time upstairs, which is what I like to see. These frames here are full of honey, so that's why the cluster is already downstairs, because this hive is so full of honey that the bees have literally not got room upstairs for all the brood rearing that they're ready to do now. They've been having natural polliners coming in, but they're still making good use of the pollen patties we put on. I put one on a month ago and put another one on a week ago, and they're working their way through it. I'll take the cozy off and we'll have a look at the extent to which they're moving downstairs. We don't need to go through frames at this stage. We can tell all we need to know pretty much from the looking at the frames from the top and from the bottom. So let's have a quick look. There's a smoker. Here's Amy's having to hold the camera with bare hands here. We'll just make sure we keep the bees nice and happy. But considering it's only 9 o'clock in the morning and it's still only about 45 degrees, the bees are very happy.
Well, they've moved that one down, haven't they?
Yeah, they got it stuck down all right. There we go. Nope. Still stuck. There it is. Up. So they're certainly occupying all that space right down to here. And this is one reason we're stuck. I still have old pads under here. These should really come out.
Now their attitude has changed a little bit.
Yeah, now that we've torn the hive apart for the first time this year. So we can see this is really well occupied down here. Well, let's have a look. You can see there's an empty frame here, but again, honey. I'm not sure about that one here, but let's have a look. Yeah, pretty light now. The cluster is just getting to the bottom here, so as well as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 frames of bees here, we have another 1, 2, 3, 4 frames of bees here. So we have a full cluster's worth. This is a good candidate to reverse the brood chambers. I'm not going to reposition them just yet. Maybe next time I come in, I'll reposition them so I put some of the honey from the full side to the side that's occupied with so many bees. these bees could do with a bit of smoke. Now, this hive went through the whole winter without its tray underneath. It would have actually benefited from having its full tray underneath, because I've been overlooked that, which also means that when I did my mite treatments, I didn't have the tray in there, so I'm quite lucky that the mite treatment worked so well. The bees have come through the winter fantastically. It's probably because it's sitting on a board here, and there's only that gap and this gap which is stopping the airflow, so the mite treatment seemed to have worked well enough because they're sitting on a more or less solid surface. So let's get these on. Certainly still plenty of honey in here, a good 25 pounds or so. No risk of starvation there. I'm going to put this on top. So with this hive, the brood chamber is predominantly here. This is fully occupied, and this is partially occupied down to 3 or 4 frames. There's room to expand this way significantly because these frames here are only partially filled with honey. There's plenty of room for expansion here. And now the bees will much more fully utilize that space quite quickly. And because the cluster is big enough and the weather forecast is pretty good, I'm not going to put the insulation back on. If the hive was still relatively small, I'd keep the insulation on as much as possible, or look at other ways of boosting the strength of those hives. Okay, close this up. Actually, I forgot to put the patty back in. Right in the middle of the brood chamber. And we can close it up. Okay. Again, what we have here, again, a small cluster. We're going to see if they are able to be expanded, and just to make sure we've got a good quality queen in here. Certainly see plenty of honey in here, and I suspect that they may have gone down into that lower brood chamber, because they may have only been able to get down in there, because these frames up here are full of honey. So before we decide that it's a really small cluster, let's works that way from the top. Yeah, there's a few bees down here, but there are 3 frames of bees here. So let's see how they look in terms of viability of the queen here. So we've got a cluster here that's roughly 3 to 4 frames of bees, plenty of honey, and the question is, so it's about the size of a nuke. So we've got an option here: let them gradually grow, or do we give them some extra boost by allowing another colony to expand into it and help that queen along. Before we decide that though, we need to see whether this queen is in good shape or not. If we've got a bad laying pattern, or we don't have a really good cluster formation here, then we say, well, the reason it's small is because the queen is not in good shape. But over the winters that we've had big clusters die as well, and sometimes you have big clusters where you've lost half the bees and you've still got a great queen, but she's just not got enough bees to support her. Now this is not that bad smaller group. There's lots of pollen being stored here already, and I can see a nice little brood chamber here. Nice little brood nest which has got bees emerging very quickly, so this group is growing quite quickly. A nice little nest there. More capped brood here. The only cells that aren't full of brood have got pollen in them. So this looks like a lovely little brood nest, just a bit small. And if we leave it alone, by the end of May, it'll be a perfectly acceptable hive. But if we boost it, I could have it being a pretty big hive by 1st of May. Here's our queen here. Beautiful little tight brood nest. So this is definitely one to save. So we are going to save this group, boost this group along with some extra bees. So we'll just separate this from down below here. You know the queen's in there. And we'll come back to this and we'll prepare a hive. And we'll prepare a hive to put this nice little queen and her little brood nest on top of another hive and get it boosted up. So let's have a look. We'd already identified this hive as being a perfect candidate to receive such a group of bees. So we're just going to prepare it now. A couple of sheets of newspaper, single layer, more or less a single layer thick. Poke a couple holes in, just to speed up the process of them getting together. Queen excluder. Now we're ready to put the other hive on top. So now the surplus bees from this cluster, which needed extra room, will eat their way through the paper and start adding to the strength of this. Within a couple of weeks, this will be a thriving colony, ready to split or ready to start off a colony all by itself. that's how you boost small hives. So things are looking pretty good. We have added an additional deep super onto 3 of the colonies, and we boosted 2 of the colonies by putting a good queen right small cluster on top of a larger colony which needed the room, which would otherwise have had another additional super. And in this way there's a queen excluder between them, and in this way they've been expanded. So and then there's a few that have been left unattended, or we've just not unattended, unchanged, because they just have a little way to go. And there's some that where we have reversed the brood chambers. I'd say a good half of them we reversed the brood chambers. So colony like this has had an extra super added. It overwintered on 2 mediums and has had an extra empty added. This one is left to its own devices. Still got a little way to go. Left the insulation on. Ones like this had the brood chambers reversed. Likewise here, brood chambers reversed. On this one, we have newspaper and a queen excluder separating 2 colonies here, where this had surplus bees and this one could do with boosting. We'll do more of that later in the season. An extra brood chamber on here, and so on. So the colonies are doing very well. We've been adding pollen patties for the last 5 weeks, and they're growing very nicely. So I'm pleased with that. This colony is doing really well. It's going to rain now for much of the next week, but by the time we get back to these colonies, they'll have substantially increased their brood chambers, and in about 2 to 3 weeks, I'll be splitting a lot of these hives, making new nukes. I'm Peter Cowan, the Bee Whisperer. See you next time.